Elaine Hayes, CEO of Ferne Animal Sanctuary. Welcome to the Practical Animal Channel.
Thank you very much.
Elaine, please can you describe your career from the start to today?
I suppose the common theme in all of my career is animals. My dad was passionate about animals. I've always loved animals, and he loved animals of all sorts. It didn't matter what it was, from creepy crawlies through to to elephants. He always wanted to spend my time with animals and work with animals. So I started out my career getting a degree in animal physiology, and then realized that when I graduated that I was probably one of the world's most unemployable people, because a degree in animal physiology doesn't qualify you to do anything. So I went off and did some work looking at mainly aquatic animals and fate and behavior of chemicals in the environment. So I started out working for a water company. But while I was working for the water company, because that didn't always fill my heart with joy, I used to go and help a friend of mine who worked over at Hunstanton rescuing baby seals from the beaches when they get abandoned by their mothers. So I used to Friday night used to be a hack across from the Midlands to Hunstanton to go and scoop up baby seals and tube feed seals and get them back to health, and then sticking them back out on seal sands. So that was really enjoyable stuff to do. So that's how I spent all my weekends, was just either filthy or soaking wet. So that was really good fun. Really enjoyed that. Spent quite a lot of time working in the water, in and around the water industry, but of course my interest was always making sure the water was as good as possible for the animals that lived there. So which was really good fun. And eventually I landed a job in conservation rather than specifically in animals. So it's conservation of everything, so plants as well, running a wildlife trust, which was fabulous. So lots of big woodlands, not very many really exciting mammals, I have to say, although I did spend quite a lot of time sniffing fox poo. Because when you're trying to distinguish between otter poo and fox poo, sadly it is the smell of the poo that tells you it's an otter, because obviously otter poo smells fishy, whereas fox poo smells meaty. But I did spend rather indecent amounts of time sniffing fox poo, getting hopeful that maybe the otters would be back in Sussex, and it took a very long time before I knew that the otters were back. So really enjoyed that, and then I moved to working for Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust. So then I really was working properly with both captive animals and wild animals, so doing work on reintroducing populations, trying to do breeding programs for rare animals and birds. And from there I moved on to helping a zoo, probably the only marine and coastal zoo in the UK, arguably, down in Torquay, to develop and grow, and built an aquarium from scratch indoors, which was fun, and spent a lot of time learning and helping with other zoos, looking at how we could breed very rare species and species that were in high demand in zoos, which we didn't want taken out of the wild, basically. And then after a bit of a diversion via some protected landscape work, which was back in conservation, landed up at Ferne Animal Sanctuary. So what do I do here? 72 acres of land. So we manage our land very sensitively and carefully. We do it for the benefit of the animals. So we're very, very careful and thoughtful about the kinds of species of plants and vegetation that we grow. So we grow loads of beneficial herb mixtures for our animals. And our animals live huge amounts of time compared to, say, the average for many animals, because they get ridiculously well looked after. And we rehome about 500 cats and dogs a year. So I keep busy. Does that cover it? I hope so.
That was a fantastic summary, and I love that fact about distinguishing otter poo from fox poo. That was terrific. I love that. Elaine, what has been your proudest moment in your career, please?
I have done I'm very lucky to do a lot of work with the fishing industry, and working on projects to help them have a much more sustainable industry. And as a result of that, I was invited to have lunch with the Queen. And when I say have lunch with the Queen, there were 12 of us. there were 12 of us sat in a dining room with her and talking to her and Prince Philip, which was fabulous. Some other fabulous people there, all of whom have been invited because they, you know, life is about what you put in and making a difference, and all these people have made a difference.
What are the skills, experiences, and personal qualities that have been key to your success as CEO of Ferne Animal Sanctuary?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think there are sort of two sets of skills. One is your technical skills. You know, I think there is people think that looking after, if they own a dog, that owning a dog qualifies them to look after animals. And as you know, there's a lot more to looking after animals than owning a dog. So I think there's all the technical skills and the knowledge and expertise on that side. And then alongside that, for me, it's a lot of financial management. We're a charity. We rely on the kindness of people to support us. And sometimes the money comes in quickly and sometimes the money comes in very slowly. And you've got to be able to prepare and manage for both those eventualities. So I think the other, you know, two qualities, I would say resilience, because it isn't always easy. And I think that sometimes people forget that when you work in an animal sanctuary, there are a lot of goodbyes as well as hellos when it comes to animals. And you've got to be able to deal with that personally and process that. And we train our staff for that. But even so, there are just miserable days where basically we just break out a tin of biscuits and just try and give everyone lots of support. So being resilient, being able to cope with that, and having a sense of humor, because you get peed and pooed on. You know, that is the reality of working with animals. You know, it's the funniest thing is when I come in, as my team call it, booted and suited. So I'll come in and they'll go, got a meeting today then? In other words, what it means is I'm actually going out of the sanctuary, and I need to avoid studiously getting too up close and personal with anything on the sanctuary until I've actually done the meeting. Once I've done the meeting, I don't worry too much because, you know, it's tomorrow's washing. But I need to try and get out of the sanctuary clean to go to a meeting that may not have other animal sanctuaries involved. It may be other charities, could be anything. But you just have to be really, you know, I just spend the time going, no, I really don't want to cuddle this animal, restrain this animal, help with anything. Because I'm booted and suited to go out, but most of the time we're in, you know, sensible, comfy clothes. So there's no heels on the sanctuary.
Elaine, what 3 books, people, or meetings have most influenced your thinking?
For me, because I am fundamentally a coastal girl, there's a fabulous book which I've read many times, which is actually not a natural history book or an animal book. It's called The Kingdom by the Sea, which is by Paul Theroux, and it's about his train journey around the coastline of the United Kingdom. And it's a truly amazing book, just because it stops off in so many different places. And I think when we all get our heads down, we get very insular, and it's just a really good reminder of just the wonder and beauty and diversity of this country alone before you even, you know, step off these shores. So it's a book I really, really enjoy, and I pick up and I probably read it about every other year. I think I know some of the words in some of the chapters as well now, because my memory is that good for it that it just stays with me. And it's just a really, really lovely read. So I really enjoyed that. People, and you probably would expect me to say this. I was very, very lucky when I worked for Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust to meet Sir David Attenborough. And it's kind of a good story because, as you can probably tell, I'm quite happy chatting. And the then CEO brought Sir David over to me and said, Elaine, I'd like you to meet Sir David. Sir David, this is Elaine. Silence. I was completely speechless, because you have to bear in mind, I grew up with Life on Earth. You know, I grew up with his programs, documentaries, and so on. And he was one of the reasons I did it. My dad was one reason, and David Attenborough was the other reason. And to just be stood in front of him was just, and the CEO turned around and went, well, we've never seen her this quiet. And so David's wonderful. He went, well, I'm delighted to meet you. You all do so much lovely work. And he was just his usual fabulous, eloquent self. So it was just an amazing, amazing moment. But I've never been allowed to forget the fact that it's the only time Elaine's been silent. So yeah, really, really good. And I suppose you wanted a meeting. I'm not going to pick a meeting people. I'm going to pick a meeting an orangutan who was in one of the zoos I worked for, had ended up there, didn't come from the wild originally. Well, obviously did originally, but was a zoo bred animal. And she was a beautiful old lady when I met her, and she went on to live another 10 years or so. And we don't allow people to go in with big dangerous apes when you work in the zoo community. It's not a good idea. But Beulah used to come up, and you used to be able to hand her food, and she particularly liked raisins. And she'd sit there with her hand open, and until she had the right number of raisins in her hand, she wouldn't withdraw her hand. And she just sat there. And to be that close to something that you are genetically so aligned with, and to look at her hands and her beautiful fingernails and the look in her eyes, it fills me up now. I can barely talk now. This is as good as it gets. It was just a life-changing moment for me.
Having met Sir David Attenborough, that puts you in a very exclusive club with two other people who have been on the Practical channel. Yeah, Mark Habban and Ian Redmond, who studied gorillas. But Elaine, what is your view of animal sanctuaries today?
Do we mean sanctuaries for domestic animals, or do we mean sanctuaries for tropical animals?
Excellent question. Your thoughts, please. Is there such a massive difference? I would imagine there is.
Yeah, I think there is. I think for domestic animals, I always describe animal sanctuaries as the safety net with the sticking plaster, where people go when there is no other alternative. And that's a really vital and incredible service that we can provide to our local communities. People find themselves, in all sorts of difficulties, John, and some of the stories just break my heart. And it breaks their heart to bring their animals in as well. Behind every animal surrender, there is a tragic story of something that has not gone to plan, or somebody's circumstances have changed, and it's a terrible sadness. So we're there for that. We're there to catch the animals when people are falling. I think that's what we do. When we talk about tropical species, I think it depends, or wild species, let's just say. I think we have to be more careful and more circumspect about what we're doing. And a lot of that is becoming apparent. And we should ask ourselves good questions about what it is appropriate to keep in captivity or not keep in captivity. And there are difficult questions around that, because, keeping a large mammal in particular in captivity, now whether that be an orca or an elephant, if you are keeping that elephant for the purposes of inspiring the next generation of children, and many of them may come from low-income families where their chance of actually seeing a real elephant is zero or next to zero, but it then inspires them to turn their lights off, to understand what climate change really means, and so therefore indirectly protect the habitat of those very animals. It's that's the difficult dilemma. And I don't think we have great answers. I don't think we have the right answers yet, but we are at least asking the right questions about what is the right thing to do. And we should certainly make sure that if an animal is in captivity, that we move heaven and earth to mimic their wild environment, so that, for example, and the classic is always when we talk about elephants living in matriarchal groups and so on. Well, if they're not living in a matriarchal group, you're not treating them correctly, because you're not addressing one of their fundamental welfare needs. So, you know, so those are the kind of good conversations we need to have, and we need to move much more. And also I'd like it, I'd like to think we all want the same thing at the end of the day, which is a healthy, thriving planet full of people and animals. But I think it would be very nice if everything was a little bit less adversarial in the world. And if we, instead of treating it as I'm right, you're wrong, it isn't like, the world isn't like that. It's not the right and the wrong, it's the how can we collectively do better. And a lot of our systems don't allow for that, and that always feels a bit of a shame. Anyway, that's way off piece. I can't remember where we were in that conversation. Was that useful?
It was extremely useful and insightful. Let me keep it closer to local, just
Okay.
for the sake of this question. What is your view of animal sanctuaries today for domestic pets, dogs, cats?
Yeah. In my ideal world, we wouldn't be needed. So we have this wonderful debate, obviously, with our trustees to talk about, you know, what is a vision for Ferne Animal Sanctuary. Well, my vision for Ferne Animal Sanctuary is that you don't need Ferne Animal Sanctuary. That would be the perfection, because every animal would have a loving home that it could live in until, you know, it needed to say goodbye, and that would be fine. But that's not reality. So for me, I think we will always be needed. And that's evidenced by our waiting lists. You know, there are certain species that we are permanently full for, and it's a case of we rehome, next one in. So I think the work that we do is really important. I think we provide that safety net. And I think for domesticated animals and pets, that's entirely appropriate.
I love the parallel that exists in my mind between what you've just said for Ferne Animal Sanctuary and Gerald Durrell's Jersey Zoo. His vision was to close the zoo. There would be no need to leave indigenous species in captivity. I love that. Ferne, 10 years from now, how do you see animal sanctuaries developing for dogs and cats and livestock?
It's really interesting. It's not one I'd thought of in a great deal of detail. I think that we will still be rehoming. The number of pet owners in this country continues to rise. I would like to think that we are able to continue to strive to provide better and better facilities for animals. So, for example, we're doing a lot of work at the moment looking at the impacts of climate change on the sanctuary and saying, well, what will our animals need? So looking to provide more shade, different shade, you know, giving our animals more choice about where they go and what they do. So more freedom for them. I'd like to think that we would be better geared up for older animals. Older animals are a real challenge because people don't want to adopt a dog or a cat that may only live 2 or 3 years. So they are often overlooked. They also, it's a perfect storm really, because they also don't do well in kennel and cattery settings. So I have this vision of Ferne as is, but with some useful additions. I'd love to create an old dog's home. But my vision of an old dog's home is a house where somebody lives with lots of old dogs, that when we can find them a new home to go to, they go from that home to the new home. I think we will do probably more of the home to home type rehoming that we do because of just capacity issues. But I travel hopefully that some of the rather illogical laws we have in this country around pet owning are dealt with. So, for example, you know, you have to put a microchip in a dog, but nobody said that you had to put a name and address in it. I mean, so what's the point in putting a microchip in there in the first place? And there we're, you know, now the cat legislation improving. I'd like to think that we would see less animals surrendered with really serious musculoskeletal problems. So there are certain breeds that are overbred and badly bred, and the fallout from that is young dogs who end up in rescues because the cost to fix them is 3, 5, 10,000 pounds to put them right. So I'd like to think that over the course of 10 years, we would stop breeding badly, because that would make the lives of those animals so much better. So yeah, so I think those are the main things I'd be seeing over the next 10 years.
Elaine, to make the conversation really quite global and to put it onto several levels, this is potentially quite a complicated question, but I'd be really interested in knowing your view of sanctuaries that are for large herbivorous megafauna, elephants if you like, but were just set up in ecosystems or even continents outside of their normal range. What is your view?
I think it's a very difficult one. I think we talked a little bit about it earlier when we were looking at the whole dynamic of how you keep animals. I'm not a fan of keeping very large animals in captivity if we don't need to. So, for example, so a classic might be there are species of elephant that are, even as we speak, critically endangered, but they're actually not kept in zoos because they'd be impossible to keep in zoos. Whereas there are species of elephant in zoos which aren't endangered, but they're kept there for what purpose? Answer: to educate. That's really why they're there, to provide the education for everybody. Whether that's the right thing to do is another big question. So there are, for example, I mean, we've had all of the debates about SeaWorld and orcas and so on, and they definitely, there really was no discussion about that. It's a difficult one. I think if we can phase out the keeping of very large herbivores in captivity, I think that is something we should be thinking about in the medium to long term. But bear in mind that many of the animals that are in captivity at the moment were bred in captivity. So it's sometimes there's a slightly naive suggestion, oh, well, we'll just put them all back in the wild. Well, no, that won't work. So I think that's why you have to think about a phasing out. So yes, there are definitely species that will do better not being kept in captivity. But at the same time, we still need to help people. We've got to think harder about how we help people engage with species that they will never see, smell, get up close to, because sometimes it is that changes people's behavior. So how do we do that in a different way? Is that where technology suddenly, holographic imagery of interacting with a large herbivore, or walking amongst a group of large herbivores? Is that the route? But we need to. It's one thing to turn around and go, well, we won't do that. But if we're not going to do that, how are we going to do better going forward? And I'd be really excited to see some of that coming to fruition. I think that would be truly amazing. I'd want to do it. So, that would be really amazing.
Elaine, what's the rarest species you've had at Ferne Animal Sanctuary?
At Ferne, nothing very rare, really. The rarest thing that we had were a pair of Eriskay ponies, which they were very interesting. Eriskay ponies as a species are very rare, and there is a specific group in this country dedicated to making sure that they survive, because the gene pool is getting quite small. And this pair of ponies actually were not known to the Rescue Society, and they came here, and we actually rehomed them to somebody who specialised in Eriskays, with the purpose of breeding them to keep the species alive.
The channel has its roots in bird of prey conservation. Do you get owls and diurnal birds of prey in, and do they get passed on to people?
Yeah, one of the things that we're very lucky to have is a fantastic network of organisations that we work with. So we all have our own specialties. So we will, we will lead on domestic. We have a lot of what you would call aviary birds here. So we're very good at canaries and finches and cockatiels and those kind of birds. But when it comes to birds of prey, I mean, as you'll appreciate, they are a specialised field in their own right. So we have links to birds of prey places. So I think it's recognising and doing what you're good at, but knowing somebody who can do the other stuff is a really useful skill.
Elaine, do you take on volunteers?
Yes, as many as you can send our way, please. Thank you very much. Yes, and they do everything under the sun, from greeting visitors to walking dogs to helping muck out all the small farm animals, to charity shops, to fundraising, to pretty much anything at all. Gardening, looking after all the memorial plaques, you know, from people whose animals have passed away, and keeping all of that looking ship-shape. Timber treating, picking up plates in the cafe, working in the gift shop, you know, anything at all, anything and everything. So we really enjoy having our volunteers. They can be very challenging because they all have an opinion, and it isn't always the one that you're running with, but it's fabulous. It keeps you on your toes, and they're just good souls. They really are.
Elaine, moving on from being a volunteer, people will progress in their lives to where they need a job, they need to pay the bills. In the field of domestic animal sanctuaries, what opportunities are there, and principally, what advice can you offer somebody wanting to work in an animal sanctuary?
Well, I think, you know, at the top of this interview, John, we talked about my career path and how difficult I found it. I think the first thing to say is that there are a lot of people who want to work with animals. So, you know, you are moving into a field which is competitive. It's probably easier than when I started because there are more places where you can go and work. I think you absolutely need to think about doing some volunteering, and I would do that before you actually embark on any kind of an academic course, because you may find that it's not for you. You know, I mean, bear in mind that most animal care staff are working outside. It's a physical job. There's a heck of a lot of cleaning involved in animal care, which people don't talk about a lot, but there is a hell of a lot of cleaning. And so if you find that you don't like cleaning, you're not really going to enjoy animal care. Similarly, food prep. If you're not somebody who enjoys food prep, you're not going to enjoy animal care, because if you're not cleaning, you're doing food prep. It's an outdoor job often. It's hard work. You get very wet in our climate. You can get a bit cold. We can manage all of that, but bear in mind, it is an outdoor job and it's a physical job. So it is hard work. It's physical. So get yourself some volunteering experience, you know, activity. Sanctuaries are always welcoming volunteers to help. Find out whether it really is the thing for you. If it really is the thing for you, go and get a recognised qualification, ideally somewhere where there's a work experience element within it, so that you can then say, well, I volunteered and I did work experience. It starts to put you on the right path. And I think the other thing, as you can see from my learning, is you don't give up, because it doesn't happen instantly. Just keep volunteering, keep trying. A number of the team that we have had been volunteering and working in a bar to earn the money they needed to pay the rent. But just keep going, and eventually you will get your break. You just need to just keep going. There are good websites, you know, Animal Jobs Direct is an obvious one. Other websites may be available, but that's an obvious one that we use a lot, and I know lots of other sanctuaries use. Yeah, I mean, go and volunteer at boarding kennels if you can't get volunteering work at a sanctuary. But you need to know that you're happy to tolerate being, you know, at times scratched, sometimes bitten, peed on, you know, that's what animals do to you, you know, and you've got to be somebody who goes, oh, okay, well, that happens. So yes, but the converse is, why would you do anything else?
I love that. Elaine, is there anything that you'd like to add?
Only that I'm always grateful for the opportunity to talk to people, and I'm grateful to be able to do something that I love, because there's lots of people out there who have a job. I don't have a job, I have a life, and my life is fun.
Elaine Hayes, CEO of Ferne Animal Sanctuary in Southern England. Thank you very much for being on the Practical Animal Channel.
Thank you, John.